the morning we began by saying that the essence of Krishnaji's teaching as told by him is this statement that observer is the observed. And we were just trying to find out how to understand this statement, how to approach it. And we thought that maybe if we understand the nature of the observer, then in that inquiry into the nature of observer, we may end up in finding that the observer is not different from the observed. So we said that the observer is made up of various images, and we also said that any image which maximizes the experience of living or living experience gets the priority. So in that sense, those images which are responsible for maximizing the living experience of that living entity, those images, they become important for that living entity, and therefore they acquire a central place. And through those images we get this sense of existence. So those images, they become our identity. So that is what is the self. So the formation of self seems to be an inevitability. It is not that some entity of the nature of the self has come from somewhere and just occupied our inner being. It's not so. The very process of living, in that process, given the arrangement, the formation of this center as the ego or the me or the self or the observer seems to be inevitable. And once this center is formed, then that starts dictating to the other images or other content of consciousness. And then it tries to arrange, rearrange, modify, throw out, bring in, accept, reject. So all kind of activity of the self starts there, and that becomes its life. And depending upon whatever content or images it accepts and then behaves according to those accepted images, then that becomes its personality. So then it is visible as a distinct person compared to other distinct persons. And that goes on. Then this self also, when it faces certain problems or certain situations, then in order to come out of that, it has this desire to know. And through this desire to know, it starts the questioning or looking at things, and through that it gathers whatever it understands. So that becomes its knowledge. And then The whole process of acquiring knowledge and using it for whatever it wants to do, that begins. And then that is the whole movement of this technology, which is gathering knowledge and using it for whatever purpose we want to use it, either constructive or destructive. But then when this center as the me finds that in spite of all this knowledge, the things don't go according to what it expects. And it also finds that there are within him the processes going on which affect its interaction with the outside. And therefore, it has to then understand what goes on within itself. So its reactions and so on. And turned inwards, it starts observing those reactions or whatever happening within in the same way as it has been observing the happenings outside. So which means that observing what is happening within results into accumulation of knowledge of those inner processes. And with that knowledge, this self tries to understand, tries to handle the inner situation. But it finds that it is not able to handle. Sometimes it is able to handle, sometimes it is not. So whatever system method it may develop, it finds that it has its own limitations, and there could be situations which cannot be controlled or handled in the same way. So it starts seeing that there is a limitation to its understanding of the inner processes, and that limitation is due to the method it is using, that is acquiring knowledge and acting on the basis of that knowledge. So probably whatever way it is observing, that observation is not revealing the exact nature of the observed. And when that is further investigated, it is found that the very entity which is trying to observe is actually distorting the observation, because it is observing according to its own inclinations, according to its own images, according to its background or conditioning, and therefore not observing the things as they are, but observing as they are visible through this screen created by the self. So that is where then this issue of observer and the observed, that comes in. The observer observing the things as per its conditioning and interpreting them as per its conditioning, therefore not observing things as they are, and therefore not understanding those things as they are. So that is where we were in the morning. And we said that this me as the center is the central issue. In fact, Krishnaji was once asked by a questioner that do we have to face these problems one by one as they come up, and which is going to take a long time, and we are not sure whether the problems will get exhausted at all. So isn't there one single problem, a central problem, which if it is solved, then all problems are solved? Then we don't have to bother about the individual problems as they arise. Just one problem, you solve it and you have solved all the problems. So in reply to that question, Krishnaji said, yes, the problem of this self-center, the center as the me, if that problem is resolved, then all the problems are resolved. Because there are no separate individual problems. The interesting thing is when we talk about the content of our consciousness, we have this sense that there is a large amount of content of consciousness. There is too many different things forming the content of consciousness. But actually speaking, there is only one content of consciousness, and that is the center as the me. And this me has put together all the content of consciousness. So it is not separate from the rest of the content. It is made up of all that content. That means every psychological content of our consciousness is the part of this me as the center. So in that sense, there is only one content of our consciousness, which is this me. And this me is made up of all kinds of images that we have gathered and stored as we have lived our life. And then emptying of the consciousness amounts to this me coming to an end. This psychological entity called the me, that entity coming to an end means the complete emptying of the consciousness. Now this, our whole life is the activity of this center as the me. In fact, we are not different from the center, we are that center. And that is our life, the self-centered life. And as we interact, through that interaction, the nature or the content of this center becomes visible. So at that point, we brought in this sense of awareness. That means as the center is active, there is an awareness of that activity. That means there is a psychological reaction arising, and there is an awareness of that psychological reaction. And with that awareness, then the real so-called inquiry it begins. Because that awareness is the first contact with the center as the me, and that contact is through the reaction of that center, which is visible in that interaction. So as the me interacts and reacts in different ways, and the awareness of those reactions, it reveals or keeps on revealing the nature of this self or the nature of this center. Now this whole process can be again taken over by this same center, and which may say that it is being aware, it is understanding itself, it is watching its reactions, and so on. And the sign of this taking over is in the form of choice. The moment there is a choice as to what to observe and what not to observe, then it is no longer observation, then it is no longer awareness, then it becomes the activity of that center, which is trying to observe, which is trying to be aware. So the pure awareness or the pure observation has no choice, has no selection. Whatever that comes up is observed. And through this awareness, as the center becomes visible, initially it is visible only as different reactions. But as the awareness deepens and the source of these reactions gets traced back, then it appears that all these reactions, they are coming from the common source. And the insight into that common source, which means the revelation of the center as the me. With that revelation, the center becomes inactive. It is no longer acting in terms of enhancing itself, in terms of gathering more and more content, and so on. And so that is where the real observation begins. Because this center is responding to the various inputs received from the environment. The environment could be outer or could be inner also. And to those inputs it is reacting, and all those reactions are being aware of, being observed. So it is not that the center is observing, but whatever that is happening is being observed. And only through that kind of observation, the whole nature of this center gets revealed. And when the whole nature gets revealed, then there is no longer that center at all. Now, this has some significance in the sense that in the absence of the center, there is still a response to the external inputs. But those responses, they just rise and fall. In the absence of the center, they are not gathered together and given continuity. They just rise and they fall. That means the content is still there in the consciousness, but then it is not held together by a center. It is still there and it will be there till it dissipates. And that dissipation may take some chronological time. How much that we don't know. But then in the absence of that center as the me, there is no holding on to this content and giving it an indefinite continuity. That thing stops, that doesn't happen. So a person may still find that yes, there are reactions arising in him and they arise and they fall. They also disappear or dissipate, and nothing is held back, because to hold back the center is necessary, and in the absence of the center nothing is held back. Things, they arise, they fall, and as this content also start dissipating and disappearing, then there is the sense of real emptiness. And in this emptiness, thoughts may arise, sensations may arise, feelings may arise. They arise, they remain, and then they disappear, because there is nothing for them in that emptiness to hold on to. So then it means that the things, they do appear there within, they are being aware of, taken notice of, and then as they come, they find they are nothing to hold on to, and then they also leave. So then a different kind of living happens. But so far, our life was completely dictated and guided by the content of our consciousness. The content was deciding everything. But in the absence of the content, things are just visible as they are. And when things are understood exactly as they are, that understanding gives rise to a completely different kind of response to the observed. So as long as the observer as the center or as the me was present, its response was in terms of likes, dislikes, in terms of judgment, right, wrong, good, bad, in terms of what should be and what should not be. But in the absence of that center, there is no such response. The response could be entirely different, which is not the result of conditioning or result of the background. The response is out of the understanding of things exactly as they are. And when things are understood exactly as they are, and responding from that understanding is what Krishnaji calls as the intelligence. So that intelligence is not the intelligence of thought. Intelligence of thought we call as intellect. So it is not an intellectual response, but it is an intelligent response. That means a response which comes out of complete understanding of whatever that is happening, whatever that is presenting itself. And so this response will be a holistic response. It will be a whole response. It will be a complete response, not the response which is limited by the intellect or by the thought or by the knowledge. If the response is dictated by knowledge, then it will vary according to the thing that is presented. It will also vary according to different times. But a response coming out of this intelligence, out of this understanding, it doesn't vary with time. It also doesn't change with respect to different things, because it is not based on the limited knowledge of the intellect. It's altogether a different kind of response. So understanding this statement, this central statement of Krishnaji's teaching, that observer is the observed, it amounts to the observer coming to an end. And that means the emptying of the contents of consciousness. And this whole thing begins with this awareness, which includes the observation, that is seeing, listening, learning. All these three are included in that awareness. So Krishnaji always calls art of seeing, art of listening, and art of learning. He doesn't call it as the science of seeing or science of listening or science of learning. Because the moment you call it as science, immediately the knowledge comes into picture. Because this movement of science is a movement of constantly gathering knowledge through observation and using that knowledge in order to understand and respond to a given situation. So that is where the system, method, and technique, they come into picture. They have their own validity in that kind of learning. So here Krishnaji is not talking about the science of learning or science of seeing or science of listening. He's talking about art. So art is, it's not unscientific in the sense that in that art also there is a precision, there is an accuracy, there is seeing things as they are, but also there is a sense of proportion. There is a sense of right placement for whatever that is being observed. There is also a sense of beauty, because anything in right proportion, occupying its right place, does create a sense of beauty. So it is an art, and that cannot be learned through any kind of system, method, or practice or technique. The expression of the art, that expression one may be able to copy through technique and through system or method. But that artistic sense, that art, that sense of proportion, that sense of creativity, that cannot be copied. So to listen to something is to be completely attentive to what is being said. Without bringing in the intellectual interpretation. Now, this is very interesting, because this is a different kind of listening than what we are used to know as the listening. Because we know the listening in terms of intellectual understanding, in terms of gathering knowledge and information, and understanding things in terms of that knowledge information. But Krishnaji is talking about a different kind of listening. Because once Pupul Jekar asked Krishnaji a question that if a person who has not heard you at all and another person who has been hearing you for 30-40 years, if both of them, they come to you together and you talk to them whatever you want to talk, and then which person is more likely to understand what you have talked out of these two? So Krishnaji said that there is equal probability in case of both the persons. That means who is likely to understand? In that, both the persons, they stand at the same level. They have equal probability. So then she further asked, does that mean that all these 30-40 years spent by that person in listening to you, they have been waste? So he said, I can't call it as a waste, but still the fact is, both of them, they have the same probability of understanding him when he talks to them together. So then she asked, then why is it so? Why the person who has spent 30-40 years, why he doesn't have any advantage over the other person who is hearing you for the first time? So he says that maybe you spent 30-40 years, but you didn't listen. So that was quite an unexpected response from Krishnaji. That means we think that for last 30-40 years we have been listening to K, and here he says that nothing has changed, maybe because you haven't listened. So according to us we have listened, but according to him we have not listened. So which means that what listening he is referring to is different than what we are referring to. So then the discussion began on the art of listening and so on. So listening is very important, and listening can create a miracle. I mean, to put it in Krishnaji's words, listening could bring about a miracle. So is it just the act of listening, or is there something more to it? So to clarify this point, in another discussion, Upul asked Krishnaji that you are talking so much about listening, the importance of listening, and the potential of listening to bring about a miracle. So if it is just the listening which is capable of bringing miracle, which means that it doesn't matter what I am listening to. So does that mean that if I listen to music, then listening to music, can it bring about that miracle? Can it bring about that transformation? So Krishnaji said no. Listening to music will not bring about that transformation. Then listening to what? He said listening to what I am telling you. So which means that listening to truth, what is being said by him, what is being told by him is the truth. And if we listen to the truth, then only that can bring about that miracle. So the quality of listening can also transform or change that which is being listened to. It is very interesting to note that people came to Krishnaji in order to discuss their problems. Krishnaji did not give them any ready-made solution, but he listened to their problems, he listened to them completely. There was no question of any interference from the observer or the listener. There was pure, complete listening. And it seems that just that listening resolved that problem which those people were discussing with Krishnaji. So without suggesting any solution, without giving them any remedy, just the listening. So in that sense, it is quite a potent and powerful action in itself. I mean, even in our day-to-day life situations also, whenever we are able to give complete listening to the other person, then the other person feels very light. The burden of his sorrow or burden of his psychological burden, it just goes. That we have also sometimes experienced, that when we are able to relate completely whatever is bothering us to someone who is patiently and completely listening to us, then that does create a feeling of lightness, a feeling of relief. And that also has some healing effect. So that is the art of listening. Krishnaji puts this art of listening even much further. When he was discussing with Pandit Jagannath Upadhyay, and this Pandit ji, he had a very high place for Lord Buddha. He considered Lord Buddha as a very high person, or whatever it is. He had great regards for Lord Buddha. So while they were discussing, and Krishnaji asking Panditji to listen, and after listening, Panditji every time coming out with some point or other and stretched the discussion. Then at some point, Krishnaji suddenly said to Pandit Jagannath Upadhyay, that Panditji, suppose Buddha is here. Buddha is here and he asks you. He asks you to just listen to him. And he tells you that if you just listen to him, then you are transformed. That is your transformation. So just listening to what Buddha is saying, you will be transformed. So will you listen to him? So at this point, some other participants, they laughed. So Krishna said, no sir, no laughter. I am serious. I am seriously putting this question. It's not a joke. Because how you listen matters the most. Because you can't argue with Buddha. He is speaking to you and he's asking you to just listen. So listening to him like listening to the truth. And if you are able to listen to the truth, then that itself is the transformation. Nothing else is required. You don't have to even try to understand. So listening has that much potential. If one can really listen, then that listening can bring about a change. But our listening is mostly in terms of the interpretation made by the listener, the observer. It interprets what it is listening to, and out of that interpretation it comes to certain conclusions which he calls as his understanding, and then based on that conclusion he acts. So it's altogether a different process than what Krishnaji is referring to as listening. And then finally he says that you can listen to a person only when you love that person. Without love, that kind of listening is not possible. So that is also referred to as listening with the heart. There is listening with the brain or the intellect, which is interpreting what is being listened to in terms of knowledge using one's intellect. That is the intellectual listening. But listening with the heart is the completely receiving that which is being communicated. And when that is received completely, that has its own impact, that has its own effect, that has its own consequences in terms of the transformation. So that is the art of listening that Krishnaji talks about. And then he talks about art of learning. So there again, the same distinction. The learning we know is learning in terms of knowledge, learning in terms of information. But he is talking about a different kind of learning, where we are not accumulating any knowledge or information, but rather whatever is gathered through experience and stored up, that is being dissipated, that is being revealed and given up. So it's altogether a different kind of learning. And through that kind of learning alone, all the psychological accumulation can come to its end. Because in order to understand the psychological content means the complete dissipation or complete ending of that psychological content, that is not possible through accumulative kind of learning, because accumulative kind of learning will only keep on adding to that psychological content. Whatever it accumulates, that becomes the addition to the already existing psychological content. So with that kind of learning, the psychological content can never come to an end. It will only keep on growing. So this different kind of learning, which is non-accumulative, only in that kind of learning, the psychological content can come to an end. As it is understood, as it is being learnt about, it starts dissipating, starts disappearing. And when the psychological content has completely ended, and there is nothing to learn. So this is what is very interesting. When we do talk about a different kind of learning, and at the end of that learning, we say that there is nothing to learn. So maybe this learning is not a process, but it is a state of mind. It is a state. So anything that is presented to that learning mode or learning state is learnt about and finished. Nothing is held back, nothing is accumulated. That means as one interacts in one's daily life, and through that interaction, there is a psychological response arising within us, then that psychological response is being attended to. It is being learnt about, and then it is ending. So that is not leaving any mark, any residue behind. It arises in response to the interaction with the environment and stays and then dissipates, goes away. So which means that that mind is in the learning mode. If it is not in learning mode, this reaction will definitely leave some mark, will leave some residue in the consciousness, which then will become the content of consciousness. And then that content will respond to further interaction. So this whole process of then building up of the content will begin again. But as long as the mind is in the learning mode, nothing is gathered. As things happen, they are learnt about and they come to an end. So this not only maintains the sensitivity, but it enhances one's sensitivity. One finds that this way of living is living with a sensitivity, a much higher level of sensitivity. Because anything which remains as a residue, that residue obstructs your capacity to sense, and therefore your capacity to sense gets limited by that residue. Because whatever that can affect that residue, only that can be sensed. Whatever that is not able to affect that residue will not be sensed. So there is a limitation on that. But in the absence of residue, one can sense anything that is coming in one's way, that is coming up in one's interaction with the environment. So it's a state of heightened sensitivity also. And then there is also gathering of energy in this, because the residue would have trapped some energy. Residue would have captured some of the energy and it would have remained there trapped. But in the absence of residue, no energy is being trapped. all of it is available. And so there is plenty of energy, there is heightened sensitivity, and there are no limitations of the contents because no content is getting formed. So it is a different kind of living because there are no limitations, and therefore there is sense of freedom in that kind of life. Because limitations means no freedom, and then the freedom becomes a limited notion in the sense that freedom to live as per those limitations. So the sense of freedom also becomes very limited if there is a content of consciousness. Because with the content, freedom only means the freedom to live as per that content. So as per the content means within the limitations of that content. And only when that is obstructed, the person feels that he is not free. But as long as he is able to live as per his conditioning, he feels that he is free. But that is actually not freedom at all. So only in the absence of the content of consciousness, the psychological content, there is this true freedom. And then he says that with this sense of freedom, which is unconditional freedom, with that comes the different kind of emotions. Usually our emotions and feelings, they are excited due to the interaction with the outer. That means outer events, outer situations, outer happenings, they create or they dictate what kind of emotions and feelings arise in us. But with this absence of the content of consciousness, the emotions are not the result of the external provocation, but the emotions are welling up from within. And they are not dependent on whatever that is happening externally. That means those emotions, they have a completely different quality. They are not affected by what is happening outside. They have their own validity, they have their own quality. And Krishnaji calls that as love. So those emotions are the expression of that love which he talks about. So this one statement that the observer is observed is explored sufficiently with that awareness. Can bring about all this. So in that sense, it is the essence of his teaching. And it is also, people also intellectually interpret it in different terms as non-dualistic approach, non-dualistic way of looking at things, non-dualistic way of life or living. But we don't have to label it in any way, as long as we are moving with the quality, as long as we are moving with what is behind those words. There are further implications of this, which maybe we will keep for the next dialogue session. And these implications, they lead to another very significant statement by Krishnaji. But I think probably we shall leave it for the next session, which is tomorrow morning. And now your questions, they will further help clarify whatever that we have been talking about. So please do ask questions if you have any, and with those questions, the things which are not yet clear will get clarified.
I have a question, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead, Mr. Shankar.
Is listening or seeing through some concept or idea or images all the time is due to conditioning or due to inattention?
Due to both.
Hmm.
Because first of all, it is due to conditioning. Because that according to conditioning, one is trying to look at, one is trying to listen to, and so on. And one is doing that because one is not attentive. If there is attention, then how the conditioning is influencing the listening and observing, that will be noticed, that will be taken note of. And therefore, it will not be possible for it to interfere in this listening or observing. But in the absence of attention, then that is what will happen. That means the listening and observing will be as per the conditioning, and it will not even be noted by the observer that it is observing according to its conditioning. It will think that it is observing as it is.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
May I say something? So the example that you gave us of Upul asking Krishnaji about listening.
Yeah.
And so Krishnaji always is telling us to listen to our without our center as the self.
Yeah.
And so in essence, I think we need to be able to observe the process of observation which is happening when the observer is observing something.
Yeah.
Observer word many times, but so we will probably, keep adding to that observer the content.
Yes.
And so is that right?
Yeah, I mean, what we are saying is that if we are not aware of the activity of the observer, then that activity of the observer will always keep on adding to the content.
Yes.
And we will not be even aware of what is being added to.
Yes. Yes.
And it will be visible only when that added content reacts to some situation in future. Only that time it will become visible. Then we will come to know, oh, this is what happened, or this is what is gathered. So until then, we won't even know that it is being gathered and stored.
True, sir.
So I have one question.
Yeah, please.
So by content of consciousness, do you mean acting through knowledge?
Yes, responding from knowledge, responding or reacting from knowledge, where the basis is the knowledge, the accumulated knowledge, which we call as the psychological knowledge. Because there is also a factual knowledge and actions based on factual knowledge in the physical world, they have their own validity.
Yeah. For
But
see, if you want to
we
go
talk
to a
about
certain place,
we talk about
that
this.
knowledge, no?
Yeah, we talk about the
Or if you have to
psychological
do
knowledge.
engineering or
Yeah.
whatever, that knowledge is
Yes.
necessary.
Yes, that's right. But we are talking about the psychological knowledge.
Yes. For example, if we see a snake, we can't start thinking, no, now what to do.
Yeah, that's right.
We have to act instantaneously.
That's right. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. One question.
Yeah, go ahead, Vinu.
So, when you say activity of the observer,
Yes.
do you mean one has to come into contact with the various aspects that make up the observer, or what are the drivers that make the observer behave the way it does, or look at the whole thing as one movement? Could you just go a little more deeper into it?
Yeah. Because we have said that this observer is made up of various images. And these images not just mean optical images, but they have a lot of content in terms of sensation, feelings, a lot of psychological content. Which means that an image which can create a psychological state. So the observer is made up of.
Is it that we have formed an image about a person, we think he's a very, shrewd guy, which he might not be from at the next moment.
Yeah.
We consider somebody to be dull.
Yeah.
So is that what we call an image, forming an image, fixed image about that person?
No, that is an image, but that image, what is the psychological content of that image? The psychological content of that image is the kind of psychological state it creates in us whenever those images are awakened. For example, if we consider some person as a shrewd person, right? Then he is a shrewd person is an image. But when we think of that person as a shrewd person, what is our state of mind? Because when we think of that person as a shrewd person, then we have certain state of mind, and that state of mind will decide our response to that shrewd person, how we will be interacting with him. So that state of mind is what we call as the psychological state. So what in a short we are saying is that any image which creates a corresponding psychological state in us, which dictates our behavior with respect to that image, then that is the psychological content of that image.
So then would image forming be wrong because man is constantly changing? So to have a fixed image about somebody, because man will be changing constantly, no?
No, but I'm not saying that change. So I'm because I'm what I know that person is
not in
only,
ourselves, the other person also.
Yeah, other person only. I'm talking about other person. For example, say I met some person. I went to his place to see him. And when I went to his place, he was scolding somebody. He was scolding his servant for not doing his work properly. So he was very angry with that. So I saw that person in anger.
Yes.
So from that, I concluded or formed an image that he is an angry person. He is a short-tempered
Yes.
person. He gets angry with
Bad-tempered.
people, right?
Yes.
So that is my image.
Yeah.
Now, my knowledge of that person is only through that image. I have not seen that person in any other situation. So I don't know anything about him as far as other things are concerned. So whenever the image of that person is recalled, right, that image depicts that person as an angry person. So
So it's a
naturally,
wrong image. No, it's not a fact.
no, wait. Why do I say that it is a wrong image? Because that is the only way I have seen that person. I have not seen that person in any other way, in any different form. I know only that much about that person, right? So I may at the most say that, well, there may be other aspects of that person which I have not seen. They may be there, but the only aspect I have seen is he getting angry. So I have actually seen him getting angry. So I cannot say that it is false, right?
So then how would you conclude if you saw him in different situations?
Yeah, then
Reacting
if I have seen him in different situations, then I have different images. Then I would say that yes, he is also angry, but he is also this and he is also that. So again, all that interpretation is according to those different images, and that is the way I look at things. That is the way I understand things. And if I have lots of images about a certain person, then I also visualize lots of different possibilities in which that person can react or respond in a given situation. Then it becomes my problem to find out how exactly he will react. And if I am unable to,
isn't that true of every other
find
person
out,
on earth?
pardon?
Isn't that true for every person?
Yeah, that is
On
okay.
earth.
That is what we are talking about. That is what we are talking about. So anyway, coming back to Venu's question. So Venu, can you just repeat, because I think this discussion, this interaction has wiped away all that.
The question was, you talked about the activity of the observer.
Yes.
So is the activity of the observer the different contents? What do we observe when you say observe the activity of the observer?
Yes. So are you saying that the activity of the observer is due to two factors? One factor is the content of which the observer is made up of, the makeup of the observer, which is nothing but its conditioning. And the other factor is the kind of environment that is around that observer to which it is responding, right? So there are these two factors.
And what is it that is driving the observer? What is the energy behind the observer?
Yeah, the content is driving the observer. The content, the psychological content, is what is driving the observer, because that psychological content has a lot of energy trapped in it. We have said that because when a psychological content comes to an end, the energy of that content becomes the energy of observation. So which means that the psychological content has a lot of energy in it, and that is what makes the observer active or act or react, whatever it is. Because that is obvious, when a person is angry, the energy of that anger won't let that person rest. It will keep on prodding him, keep on making him react in some way or other. Unless he does that, he will not be comfortable. I mean, just to give you an example, just about a couple of days ago, I was traveling. I was just sitting next to the driver, and that driver's mistake, it was that driver's mistake. It was not the other fellow's mistake. That this car, it just got brushed with another car. They touched briefly, and then that other car, it just passed by, it went ahead. And this fellow, although it was his mistake, he got very angry with that other car driver. And with that anger, he was very uncomfortable. He wanted to do something. He wanted to respond. And if he doesn't respond, then he was feeling low or being insulted or being seen as weak person and so on, whatever that conditioning may be. But he wanted to respond according to that conditioning, and that anger was provoking him to respond. So he tried to follow that other car. And when his car was just by the side of that other car, both the cars moving at high speed. But then because he was besides that car, so from his car he was shouting at the other driver and cursing him and saying, oh, don't you know driving and what kind of driving you do and all these things. So only when he did that, actually he wanted to do much more, but naturally on express highway you can't stop, and then at that point the ways they differ because this fellow had to exit and that fellow had to go straight, continue on that highway. So that broke that communication. But even whatever little bit he could shout at that other person, he felt that he had done something. So then slowly his anger subsided. So that reaction of anger had so much energy. And I was just sitting next to him and I could feel all the thing that was going on in himself. The irritation, the anger, the helplessness, that not being able to respond adequately to that person, and this urge to do something to harm that fellow, that sense of violence which was in that person, which was arising. All those I could feel in myself. And I had to be very attentive and watchful. Otherwise, I also would have got carried away with all that. So you see, this psychological content has lots of energy, and that is what drives the observer. So whatever the external environment provokes in that observer, right, that provoked reaction itself has a lot of psychological energy, which then makes that observer act in a certain way as per his conditioning. So this is what happens actually.
So we are not really sensitive to this psychological energy, but very only superficially we say that, yes, I'm observing anger and watching this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, probably when we say that I am observing anger, probably we are not sensing that energy of anger. We are just observing the expression of anger. That means if we are observing that certain person is angry, then we are only observing his expression, which shows that he is angry. But probably we are not sensing what is actually happening him. We are not sensing that psychological happening. Or say if we happen to get angry, then we are actually having that sensation of anger, that feeling of anger, right? And we are also able to sense it because it is happening within us. But then the moment we conclude that it is anger, the moment we label it as an anger, then we are no longer sensitive to it, because the observer has concluded what it is. And once it has concluded what it is no longer interested in it, because then it will try to respond to it or further respond to it according to what it has labeled it. So if it has labeled it as an anger, then whatever his conditioning as to how to respond to anger, right? Then as per that conditioning, it will start responding. So which means that it is no longer with that reaction of anger. It is no longer observing it, but it is responding to that according to his conclusion and conditioning.
May I ask a short question, sir?
Yeah, please.
Shall I suppress to form images from moment to moment? When I see somebody, obviously, due to conditioning, the image automatically starts to form. So, shall I make an effort to suppress forming this image?
No. There is no question of separation, Mr. Shankar. One needs to only observe. That means when you pay attention to this image forming activity, that means you are meeting some person and you are able to see how you are forming an image about that person, right? Then the moment you are attentive to that, then that image formation stops there only. At whatever point you are attentive to it, at that point, that image formation stops. Now, beyond that point, it cannot continue without your consent. That means at whatever point you are aware of the reaction, from that point onwards, the reaction can continue only with your consent. That means if you allow it to continue, it will continue. Otherwise, it just waits there or stops there until you are inattentive or unaware. The moment you are unaware, then it takes off again.
Thank you, sir.
Can I read from the chat?
Yeah.
After awareness, we have more sensitivity. On the other hand, you mentioned about emptiness. Can you expand on that?
No, but how emptiness and sensitivity, are they in conflict with each other? In fact, they are not. Emptiness means more sensitivity, because we have said that as long as there is a content in consciousness, as long as there is a content, active content, let us put it this way, because probably we don't know the state of complete emptiness of consciousness. What we can say is that either the content is active or not active. So whenever there is the active content in our consciousness, then we will be able to sense things only according to that content. That means there is a limitation on our sensitivity. And whatever this active content allows, only that will be sensed and seen. But if there is no active content, then there is no limitation on sensitivity. Then we are capable of sensing anything that comes before us. But it is the content which limits the sensitivity. So actually, the emptiness and sensitivity, they are not contradictory. The emptiness of the consciousness means enhancement of sensitivity, because there are no limiting factors in that empty consciousness which will limit the sensitivity.
Sir, suppose one starts seeing things as they are, and the action is not based on the judgment or like and dislike, but such a person, his actions will be judged by others and liked or disliked by others.
Yes.
Then, I mean, for example, when people judge Krishnamurti's action, I mean, then this fear that our actions will be judged So that also has to be discarded, because most of our life, if I'm talking about my, on this thought, oh, what others will think of me, what others will think of me.
That's right. Because then if we say that, then that means the consciousness is not yet emptied. We have already formed a new content in terms of what will people say, what will they think, what if they judge me, and if they judge me wrongly, then what kind of troubles they will create for me. So all that becomes another content of consciousness, and therefore it is no longer empty. And then that content will dictate our action, because then whatever kind of response we want from others, then what will create that kind of response in others, that we will try to be. That means we will try to project ourselves according to what others consider as right, to avoid the troubles created by others. So that is again acting according to the content of consciousness.
May I ask you one question, sir?
Yes, sir.
What we are talking about is the listening process just now.
Yeah.
Can this be related, or can it be called as a Samyak Shravan in Jain Darshan?
Oh, that I don't know, sir. I don't know what is Samyak Shravan in Jain Darshan. So I cannot compare it with what Krishnaji is talking about. So probably a person who,
like that.
Yeah, probably the person who knows it, he may be able to tell whether it is same or not same. But provided he also understands what Krishnaji is talking about when he talks about listening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take it.
Sir, I have a question with regard to that art of listening.
Yeah.
So you said in one instance when Krishnaji said that someone being with the teaching for many years and someone listening for the first time have that equal chance.
Yes.
And in another case, Pandit Jagannath Upadhyay, where you said that Buddha is there and will you listen?
Yeah.
So actually, what is that actual state of that listening, sir? Is it a state of existence itself, or is that listening something like a concentrated attention kind which holds for a span of time? Is it like that? What is that state of attention which Krishnaji has pointed out in that sense?
Yeah, Krishnaji, in that same conversation with Pandit Jagannath Upadhyay, Krishnaji further said that that state of listening is the state of love. So only in the state of love, the real listening can happen. That means you are listening to Buddha because you love him. You have complete trust in him. Not only that, you know that he is speaking the truth. And so in that state of love alone, there can be that kind of listening which can transform a person. So again, we are back to square one because we don't know what is that state of love. But even in our own life, I mean, the person whom we care, with whom we have very affectionate relationship, right? A person whom we love in our sense of love. we do listen to him very intently. It's only when we don't have that kind of affectionate relationship, we don't listen. Or it's only when we start reacting, then we don't listen. And to give an example, if we have children, right, a child comes to you, and your own child, and starts telling you something, right? Now, a person does claim that he has very affectionate relationship with his child, but when it comes to listening, it creates a question mark on his feeling that he is affectionate towards the child, because the child is relating the incidents where the child misbehaved and did things completely contrary to his parents' expectation, and then the child is honestly relating that whole happening. Then even before the child has finished, the parent is already reacting. He is already getting irritated, and he is feeling, how could that child behave in such a way? How could he do it? So even before the child has finished his narration, the parent bursts out with anger on that child, starts scolding. Why did you do this? How could you do that? Why couldn't you be careful? And so on. Particularly if child has damaged something very precious to the father or parents, then usually parents, they react in this way. And then they are no longer interested in what the child is telling them. But before that only they burst out with anger on that child. So which means that they are not giving any patient listening to what the child is trying to tell. Much before that, they have already reacted. Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Listening without any psychological content is a listening with love?
No, we can conclude like that. What we can say is that at least we should give a complete listening to whatever somebody is trying to convey, right? But from that, we cannot conclude or imply that therefore that listening must be the listening with love. Definitely, when there is love, and in the state of love, when you are listening, you are giving complete listening. But it cannot be concluded vice versa. That means state of love will definitely result in complete listening. But complete listening may not imply, therefore, there is a state of love.
Sir, that love, have we come in contact even unconsciously, though we may not know it's actually that love, but have we touched upon it? As every
possibly, I think what I feel that whenever there is that experience of falling in love with someone, if one has experienced that in one's life, if one had fallen in love with someone, then probably that may come quite close to the love which Krishna is talking about. I cannot say that it is the same love, but it can come quite close to it, because then all your responses, they completely change with respect to that person. But then the observer is not yet over. I mean, the observer is still there. So that also interferes. So then which generates a sense of possessiveness about that person. So although on one hand, you have fallen in love with that person, but on the other hand, you are also feeling possessive about that person. So it's kind of a mixed kind of state of mind. So we have some such experience probably. Yeah.
Good evening, Kishore.
Yeah.
Durga here. Yeah.
Yeah, Durga. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to add a few more points about this listening, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember reading somewhere, like, he says, listen to everything in life also,
Yes.
like a falling leaf, or, the
Yeah.
smile of a baby,
Yeah.
or, rituals of an old woman. He says, listen and learn from everything also, isn't it, sister?
Yeah.
Apart from him. So,
Yeah.
and that's one thing I wanted to add on to that listening aspect.
Yeah.
Not only listen to or listen to everything outside,
Yeah.
like these are the three instances that are coming to my mind,
Mm-hmm.
the falling of a leaf, I don't know the exact words, I don't remember. And secondly, like, you are saying when you love something, like maybe this very thing, why one is reading Krishnamurti, if they have found that kind of a passion in Krishnamurti, then automatically things start falling in place.
Yeah.
Or, if there is a desire in the very first instance,
Yeah.
that, if you read Krishnamurti, you will become some elite person, or it will lead you somewhere, like, if if that aspect is there in the very beginning, though one is not looking at things, what all K is saying. With that state of mind itself, if one is looking, reading Krishnamurti, is
Yeah.
it passion, or is it love, or is it a deep interest that has got one to connect to Krishnamurti? Or one has these images already in their mind, reading Krishnamurti makes them go somewhere, or make them enlightenment, or transformation, whatever. Maybe asking that very basic question itself. So that's all sort
Yeah.
of things in place. So I just want to add these 2 points.
Yeah. 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 No, a person that we can call it as a interest, but that interest can also be having some motives behind it. Why one is interested in something.
Yes.
So
That
what
very,
does one want to achieve through that?
yes, sir. So that
So
itself obstructs the very seeing and the very listening, and
yeah.
nothing will go into their minds of whatever K is saying, isn't it, sir? That very screening, that screen itself
Yeah. Yeah.
has in there.
No, actually, one may start reading K with that kind of interest, but if one is really reading, then that reading will also have its own impact, and then that may change uh, that interest, or that may change the motive behind that interest. That can also happen. Yeah.
And in this context of, how, whether one is observing oneself
Yeah.
without any motive, I think this basic fundamental question itself they can ask, that
Yeah.
clarifies whether one is observing, without, this observer interrupting, coming in between.
Yeah.
So the very basic questions, if one asks, sir, whether is it easy one looking from the images one has made of himself or somebody else? Maybe this asking questions itself keeps bringing a lot of clarity to oneself, whether
Yeah.
one is looking through screens,
Yeah.
or, observer
Yeah.
coming and interacting all the time. So that's
Yeah.
only one way you can check oneself. One way one
Yeah.
can check oneself.
Yeah.
I just want to add those points. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Is the enhanced sensitivity a gradual improvement or transformation, or does it become in spurts, in moments of clarity, or one comes to it to a permanent state and it continues? Enhanced sensitivity.
Yeah. This enhanced sensitivity, it will continue to stay and continue to enhance if you are living as per that sensitivity. But then if you become slack, then that enhancement may go. One can again become sloppy, sluggish, and therefore insensitive. But if one continues to live as per that enhanced sensitivity, then it can further grow, it can further deepen. So it is up to oneself what one does.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Kishore. Just to have a follow-up question there. So this was my question here. So that means that there needs to be a constant effort, at least in terms of paying that attention, of observing the observed without the observer.
I mean, what we are trying to say is that there is no alternative to being attentive. I mean, one cannot ask or that how long should I be attentive? Can I not be my normal state? Because many times this paying attention or being attentive is stress, it generates stress in us. And we just want to give up everything and just be the normal human being and forget about this business of paying attention. But that is mainly because it is the observer who is trying to pay attention. And when the observer is trying to pay attention, the observer has already decided what he wants to attend to. And therefore, it is no longer attention, but it becomes a concentration. The observer wants to concentrate on that which it has decided to attend to. And then concentration means a constant struggle between what you want to concentrate upon and then other content which is demanding your attention. So there is a conflict. And because of that conflict, then that creates stresses and fatigue. So the attempt to remain attentive results in this kind of situation. So in that case, one has to just give up the whole thing for the time being and then come back to it afresh later on. Because it is not the attention is not the activity of the attender. It is not the activity of the observer. But it is quite likely that the observer may take it over and say that yes, he is trying to pay attention, or he's trying to do this, or he's trying to observe, and then he's trying to observe without gathering, and so on. So the observer may end up in this kind of activity based on what it has read or what it has heard. But then that activity is not the real quality of attention. That is not the awareness. So if you find that this paying attention is creating any such kind of effects or reactions, then it is better to stop at that point and leave the whole endeavor and just remain as your normal being, and sometime later come back to it when you are completely normal.
Kishorji, I know we are over time and probably...
No, you can ask, no problem.
I'm afraid that this question may leave me. I took note in any case if I... Kishorji, the example you gave about parent discipline really resonated with me, and I just wanted to share. So the fear of, when we don't, like, when I'm not listening to my daughter, it's always this fear that, I have to discipline first and then discipline and her future, and all of these things come so strongly. It almost sounds like the center, right? It's like the future, all the experiences of everybody comes back with the force, and you feel very authoritative in, continuing your disciplining strategy, and it almost tosses the whole love out of the picture. But it's also strange that we call this love, this worry about the future for the child.
That's right. Actually, one should be concerned about the child, but that concern doesn't necessarily mean that you keep on worrying, because worry is not acceptable in any situation. Because worry means repetitive thinking about something without coming to any definite conclusion about it or definite decision about it. That means there is a situation, and in that situation, we have to decide some action or decide something. And whatever decision we make, we are not happy with it. We feel that, oh, this may not work, so let me think again. And when you are unable to take a decision, you end up in thinking about the same thing again and again and not being able to come to any definite decision. So that is the nature of worry. And that worry is quite energy consuming. It can actually exhaust you. And so it is not acceptable in any case. So what they say at the most, that if you are unable to come to any definite decision, then you should be at least able to put aside that matter for some time, saying that, well, right now I'm not able to take any decision, so I'll just put it aside and come back to it later on whenever I feel that I am in a position to take any decision. So you put it aside. So that at least breaks that chain of repetitive thinking, and therefore you are no longer worried about it, and then you can attend the other things, whichever things they come up. So constantly worrying about child means we are unable to find out what exactly we should do with that child and how we should do it and so on. And so we are worrying about that child, but that worry also affects the child. And the effect is not that good one. So it is better, it's okay. I mean, if you have that bond of affection with the child, then you will be able to interact with the child with that affection. You'll be able to observe the child with that affection, and that itself will reveal lots of things to you about the child. And then that will also tell you how you can correct, if there is any need of correction, how you can go about it and so on, without that offending or without frightening that child. Yeah.
Thank you, Kishorji.
So I think time is almost over, and
yes, sir.
So we can stop, and we'll meet tomorrow morning at 10:30.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.